If you enjoy hearing these eerie tales and want more to help you drift off or keep you up at night, don't forget to tap the like button. It really helps the channel grow. My wife of 7 years wore a red ribbon on her wrist when I found out why it shocked me to my core. I am 35M and have a wonderful wife who is 32F. We have been married for 7 years and have 3 beautiful children that gave me shivers of excitement down my spine when they were born. My wife, Marianne, has suddenly been starting to wear a red ribbon around her wrist ever since our last date night, July 18th, 2023. I wonder sometimes why she wore it. The day I found out why she did was the day I almost hung myself out of confusion. "Honey, you're back from work," she said with a slight grin on her face whilst tightening the ribbon around her wrist. "Hi, babe. The office was a bit crowded today, so my boss let me come home early." As I replied, a disgusting stench drafted into my nostrils. I immediately gagged, wonder what the hell the smell was, and noticed it came from the direction in which my wife sat. "Babe, what is that smell?" I say, pinching my nose in disgust. "Oh, nothing," she said a few moments later. I looked at the red ribbon and noticed it was a bit stained. So without warning, I just pulled it off. Beneath the ribbon was the most vile thing I have ever witnessed in my entire life. There, underneath the ribbon, was bits of torn flesh, rotting as maggots swarmed her hand. I instantly shrieked and ran out of the room, barfing in the bathroom. I am currently writing this post as she is banging on the bathroom door, begging me to open it up. What should I do? Daddy's never gonna hurt you again. I was my dad's only child. Being a daughter, you'd assume a father would be protective. I'd get beat regularly, and much worse. When you're 6, you'll do what you have to in order to survive because running away is not an option. I suppose I knew it was coming. It was Friday night, and once night had fallen, and it was only my mother and I. The dreaded routine of beatings and grasping at the straws of futility would only be a matter of time. "Go, Lily. Go sit in the closet and wait for me." My mother was a Cuban immigrant with nothing but courage flowing through her veins. Still, I never understood at the time what a restraining order was, nor why it could so easily be broken. When the rumbling engine rang out and potent exhaust fumes began to flow through the vents, I could only recoil, because evasion was my only defense. Predicting the level of his rage depended on the force of the car door slamming. So when it audibly shattered the driver's side window, I knew it was worse than ever. As a child, my anxiety would render me unable to move. A spider flashlit. I couldn't make split decisions. So when the door is kicked down and I hear, "Helena, Helena, you bitch, that door better be unlocked." Zrania, I likely was staying put, even if running was the best choice. By this point, I dissociated from my body by focusing on 2 ants on the floor carrying piles of potato chip crumbs when the thud of my mother's body hit the kitchen floor. I could unwittingly escape the horrors inevitable to come by staring at a spot on the wall and imagining myself watching from the other side of the room to cope until it ended, every single time. As for Mother, this night, no words were uttered. She never got a chance. "Lily, baby, Daddy's home. Come out and Daddy won't be mad." Muscles tensed, agonizingly tight. I was frozen once again. Tears streaming down my cheeks. I'd learned to cry silently. The stumbling, uneven footsteps on the first floor told me he was more inebriated than usual, and also it told me that Mom was really hurt. Usually she'd fight him with every fiber of her being on his way to the staircase, despite it always resulting in bloodshed. And then, 1, 2, 3, the footsteps creaked up the steps. "Lily, here I come. Better be special for me tonight. Be a good girl and come out." Mom always instructed me to hide in different places, but never thought to tell me to just leave. The internal force of my inability to react and the external evil of my impending death had me feeling acceptance. At only 6 years old, I was already prepared to die, and die horribly. 4, 5, almost up the steps. I'm a spider under a flashlight, wanting so terribly to make the decision to run to the bathroom and hide behind the curtain, but too frightened to act on it. "Mommy, If ghosts exist, then please do something. Then, that inevitable cracking of the broken top step. He's here. Dad was at the top of the steps. The bathroom, the shower curtain, hide in plain sight. Do it, Lily. It's your only chance. The first place he'll look is the closet. I was screaming inside. Then I heard the bathroom door slowly creak open, steps moving inside, and the shower curtain. Metal against metal. He'd ripped it off the hinges. No Lily there! Where could she be? Where did Mommy hide you this time? Sweating, heart racing, fingers running up and down the delicate skin of my belly, and brush over the soft skin of my arms, over top of the already existing scars. How much worse will it get? How much more blood would I lose once again? Dad was just outside the bedroom, and then the footsteps halted, right outside the door. By the sound of the metal against the hollow door, I knew tonight he had a bat. Broke my legs with it once. I began to grip and pull at my clothes, and then I couldn't stop it. I began crying profusely, and in an effort to hopefully live, even if it meant disfigurement, I stood up and got ready to step out into the shadow of the 6-foot-tall, brooding figure bearing down on me. Ready to take the whipping, beating, or worse, that thing which would awaken me in sweat from my nightly terrors. If baby girls in the closet, come out wherever you are. I'd accepted my fate, and then a dull, loud tack noise and vibration of the floor from a loud slam. Dad was so drunk, he'd fallen over. Maybe now I could run, but I couldn't get my legs to move. And then, the visual of my mom's bloody corpse flashed in my mind, and miraculously, something imperceptible caused me to jump up and run. I pushed out of the closet and ran to the door, prepared to jump over Dad's hopefully unconscious body and leave out the back door. And as I approached the door, I was stopped in my tracks. Standing in the hallway was my mother, unharmed and untouched. And at her feet, Dad's lifeless body with an axe in his back. I gazed up at my mother with watery eyes in wonder and astonishment, and when her eyes met mine, she said the sweetest thing to ever fall upon my ears. Mama found a good hiding spot, baby. Daddy's never gonna hurt you again. Found a tape of a woman being killed. I was at my grandmother's house, helping my grandmother move furniture around. She became my mother figure after the death of my mother when I was a young child. And I had been staying with her ever since my car accident. My grandmother helped nurse me back into health, so I made an effort to alleviate her of any and all physical tasks. I felt it was the least I could do. It was in the attic, when I accidentally knocked over a box. The box was filled with VHS tapes, with the farthest dating back to 1990. All that was written on them was the year. There was a TV in the attic as well because we used the attic as more like a functioning room than a storage space. So I decided to play the oldest tape. I expected to see happy memories, home videos, scenery, anything other than this. The video starts with whoever is holding the camera, filming a woman sitting alone at a small table at a coffee shop. She's reading. The camera was zoomed in on her hair glowing in the light. Fixed. The tape then skips to a new setting, in what looks like downtown Chicago somewhere. I can see the back of the same woman from before, walking down the street, oblivious to the person trailing and filming behind her. The sky is now a dark gray. I can see lights from passing cars glinting off her shiny boots. The camera is clambering and rubbing up against the jacket of the cameraman. He or she's not far from her, but is far enough away to show that he or she's not with her, clearly stalking her. The scene lasted maybe 5 minutes of the monotonous walking until it shifted to the woman now bound and stowed in the trunk of a car. She was taped up, unable to speak. All I could hear was the sound of heavy rainfall accompanied by her screaming and crying. Her muffled panic broke my heart in two. My spine became frozen. I couldn't open my eyes any wider. Any moment the film could shift to something so much more grotesque, so morbid, so life-changing, and I could do nothing but watch in horror. I saw a black-gloved covered hand sprout from behind the camera, slam the trunk door closed, trapping her inside. It's now clearly night. The next scene skips to the woman, now beaten and bloody while tied to a chair. The location looks to be a warehouse somewhere, the only light coming from a single fluorescent bulb above the woman, illuminating pools of crimson red blood at her feet. The camera is steadily held, so much that it seems to be propped up by a stand. I can hear the poor woman moaning in pain underneath the tape covering her mouth. I can also hear something shifting around on the concrete, like someone adjusting their stance. It seemed manic. I could hear clambering of metal, like tools being packed or unpacked from a bag. My stomach now fully turned. The stalker then walks into frame, showing only his back. His head was completely covered in a balaclava. He carried a blade in his right hand. My heart completely halted. The stalker held her drooping head up, tilted her face upward, and began to slice her throat from her left ear all the way to the right. She squirmed and gargled in her desperate and useless attempt to survive. I had never seen so much blood in my life. The killer then takes off his mask and stares into the camera, flashing a toothy grin. The film then abruptly stops. I was held in place by my now shot nerves. My blood slowed into stillness, completely discoloring my body into an almost corpse-like white. My grandmother was watching me. She, shakingly, tried to console me from across the room, struggling to form words through the river of tears streaming down her face. She said she didn't want me to ever be reminded of who I was before my accident. My son's teacher has been giving him some strange homework. I have recently had to move to another city due to work. My family and I, which consists of me, my wife, and my 9-year-old son Dylan, were suddenly uprooted from our quiet life and had to move to a busier city, which none of us were used to. My wife had to find another job in the city, and my son had to leave friends behind and start at a new school, which I hoped would all be worth it for the sizable pay rise that I was receiving. We have been moved into our new house for about a month now, and everyone seems to be adjusting to the new lifestyle that we now have. My wife has found a new job, which she enjoys, and she has made a number of new friends there. My son is also settled in well to the new school. He is in the 3rd grade, and due to being in a busier city, is in a larger class than he is used to. I don't think he minds though. He has already made a few friends that have helped him adjust to the new school. His teacher, Mrs. Wagner, was a younger woman, around 30, who Dylan seemed to really like. He would always come home and tell me and my wife all about the fun he had at school and the fun lessons that Mrs. Wagner would teach. I had only met her the once, when I dropped Dylan off at school on the first day, and as far as I could tell, she was a very nice lady. Every night, Dylan would come home with different homework that he would have to complete before school the next day. I'm not a massive fan of homework, but it seemed like the homework that Mrs. Wagner always set was quite simple tasks that could easily be completed in a night. One night, Dylan had to ask a parent find out what their parents did for work and ask 3 questions about their job. And another night, he had to research their favorite animal and find out 3 interesting things about it. It was always simple tasks like that, or it was simple worksheets that Dylan could complete in half an hour or so. Every night, I would ask Dylan what his homework was for that night, and then I would help him with it if he needed help. That's when I noticed the homework becoming a little bit strange. One night in Dylan's 3rd week of being in the new class, he came home looking upset. I asked him when he entered the kitchen what was wrong, and he told me that everything was okay. I then asked him what his homework was for that night, and he told me that he didn't have any for that night. This was surprising because he had some sort of homework task every single night he had been in Mrs. Wagner's class, so it was strange that he suddenly didn't. Dylan then left the kitchen and went into his room, shutting the door behind himself. He didn't usually close the door, but I thought that he must have wanted some privacy. I could tell, though, that something was wrong, but he didn't want to tell me. Dylan spent most of the night in his room, apart from dinner time, when me and my wife told him he had to sit at the dinner table with us. He seemed to be in a better mood during dinner and was fairly talkative and making jokes like he normally did. After dinner, though, he went back to his room and closed the door. We decided to let him stay in there for a while, but after an hour or 2, I went in to see him and let him know that it was time to go to bed. I walked down to his room, opened the door, and when I looked inside, I saw that he had already fallen asleep over his workbook. I quietly walked over to him to gently wake him up and move him to his bed, but that's when I saw it. The homework task that was set for that night. The title that was written in Dylan's workbook was, "Would I miss my parents if I no longer lived with them?" At first, I was taken aback. This was a very weird task to set for a group of 9 and 10-year-olds. I didn't really know how to react to this. I continued to read, though, to see what else he had written. He had written, "I would miss both my mom and dad very much. I love them both a lot and they help me with everything. I love spending dinner time with them. But I would probably love someone else as much as them if I had to, like you were saying today, Mrs. Wagner." When I read the final sentence, I felt chills down my spine. I would probably love someone else as much as them if I had to. The words struck me like a brick to the face. What had Mrs. Wagner been telling my son? What was the purpose of telling him these things? I decided, probably stupidly, not to tell my wife about what I had found. She would worry, and she probably had a right to worry, but I didn't want to concern her. I decided that I would instead confront Mrs. Wagner tomorrow and ask her about this strange homework task. The next day, I took Dylan's school like I normally do, except this time I got out and walked up to the classroom with him. I saw Mrs. Wagner, alone in the classroom, as I entered the room, and she greeted me with a smile. "Hey, how are you?" she said as I entered the classroom. "How is Dylan settling in?" I answered that he was settling in well, but I did have 1 or 2 concerns. She asked what they were, and so I explained. "I was just curious about the homework you set yesterday, the one about how much they would miss their parents. I am just concerned because it is a very strange and confronting thing to ask a group of 3rd graders. I also noticed that Dylan wrote that he might have to love someone else if he had to, like you told him. I would really like you to explain that." I asked her, quite bluntly. "Oh, that," she replied as she let out a slight laugh. "Yesterday I was teaching about how parents love and protect their kids, but also how that there are also other people that would be there to help them if they need it." I wasn't satisfied with this answer and was about to question her further, when suddenly a large group of school children entered the classroom. They were all walking in 2 rows. They all greeted Mrs. Wagner and greeted her one by one. They seemed very well behaved, almost too well behaved. I then saw Dylan take a seat next to one of the students, who was staring to the front of the classroom with their arms crossed. At the entrance of the rest of the class, Dylan's behavior seemed to change. He seemed to sit up a bit straighter, and his eyes widened as he began staring at the rest of the class. I looked around and noticed that all of the students were staring at the same spot. All their eyes were pointed at Mrs. Wagner. Something didn't feel right, but I knew that Dylan needed to stay at school, and this was probably some sort of morning routine they had. I left, still with concerns about the homework, but I decided to wait and see if any other strange homework would be set before I would take this matter further. I decided that I would pick Dylan up from school, though, and so I left work a little bit early and drove over to the school. The school bell rang, and soon all of the students were dismissed and starting to come out of the school gate. Most of the kids came running and screaming out of the gate, apart from Mrs. Wagner's class. They all walked out in a line, walking in time. This disturbed me. I had never seen a group of students so well behaved, especially even after the school bell had rung. Dylan walked over to the car and hopped in. He didn't say anything and sat in his seat, staring straight forward. I asked him if he was okay, and he just replied with the word, "Yes." I drove him home, in silence, and when we got home and inside, Dylan went straight to his room and closed the door. I knew something was definitely wrong, but I didn't know what. I decided to leave him alone until my wife got home and I would tell her everything that had been going on. She got home about half an hour later, and I sat her down and explained everything that had been going on. She sat and listened, and started to look more and more worried with every word I said. "Maybe I should go and talk to him, he might like that," she said once I had finished explaining everything. I agreed, and so she went. into his room, and I waited out in the lounge room for them to finish talking to each other. 15 minutes later, Dylan walked out of his room and into a lounge room. He was holding a small workbook, and he said, "Can you help me with my homework, Dad?" "Of course. Come and show me what you need help with," I replied. He held out the notebook, and I took it out of his hands and read the homework task for tonight. Written on the top line of the page was one task: research the best way to inject your parents with anesthetic. I barely finished reading the sentence when I felt the sharp pain in my neck, and I looked down and saw the needle sticking out of the side of my neck. Dylan was holding the other end of the needle, a blank stare on his face. Everything started to go black, and the last thing I remember seeing is Dylan staring down at me as I lay on the floor. I don't know how long I was out, but I was awoken by my wife screaming and crying. I woke up startled as she continued to scream. "He's gone. Dylan's gone." She kept screaming. I looked up at her, and the first thing I saw was the small pinprick that was on the side of her neck. She had been injected too. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to find my son. I tried my best to get up, but I think the drug hadn't properly worn off yet because I still couldn't move properly. I could move my arms, so I managed to get my phone out of my pocket and dial the police. I explained to them what had happened, and they said that they would send officers out and would begin looking for Dylan. I then noticed that it was already 9 in the morning, and so I decided to ring the school and see if Dylan had gone there. I dialed, and a lady answered the phone. I asked if she had seen Dylan from Mrs. Wagner's class. "No, I am very sorry, but we haven't seen him today. In fact, we haven't seen anyone from Mrs. Wagner's class today. They are all absent. Which is very odd because Mrs. Wagner hasn't shown up for work either today," the lady on the phone said. I hung up and sat in silence for a moment. My wife had heard what the lady said, so she also just sat there in total silence. That was all 3 weeks ago, and Dylan is still missing, along with Mrs. Wagner and the rest of his classmates. All the parents of the kids in Dylan's class have the same story. They were injected with something by their own children, and when they woke up, their child was gone. No one knows where they went, but we all had the same questions. Were they all together? Was Mrs. Wagner with them? Was this all planned? Why were all the students acting so strange in the day leading up to this? Were they hypnotized or drugged? Or maybe something even more sinister was happening. Horrifying experience during quarantine. I was upstairs in my room one night playing video games with the volume really loud when I thought I heard noises coming from downstairs. I muted the TV and listened closer. Nothing. I resumed playing the game for another hour when I heard it again, only louder. I was sure I heard it this time and was a little freaked out. To assure myself, I went downstairs to the basement where I thought I heard the noise coming from. As soon as I opened the basement door, I was hit with a cold breeze. I went downstairs and saw the window wide open. I was 100% sure I'd closed and locked all the windows in the house. I was ready to make a run for it when something stopped me. I turned around and for the first time noticed the closet door was slightly cracked open. I stood for what seemed like 30 minutes in front of that door, debating whether I should open it. I moved closer and put my hand on the doorknob. All of a sudden, I heard a creepy crackle coming from inside the closet. I have never run faster up a flight of stairs before. I locked the door and called the cops, who had an unusually fast response time. They came in and searched the house, and not even 5 minutes into their search, I heard a gunshot from downstairs. A few minutes later, they came out with a deranged-looking man, probably homeless. They put him in the back of the car and told me they had opened the door, and the man was holding a gunshot at them and missed. He luckily missed, and the cops disarmed him and arrested him. The scariest part was how close I was to opening that door and likely being murdered. My brother didn't leave his room for 3 days. My parents wouldn't let me check on him. On the 3rd night, Jacob didn't come out of his room. I got the courage to bring it up to Mom. "People don't sleep for this long," I said. She was cooking a casserole, the 6th one this week. We were running out of fridge space for the leftovers, but she kept making more. I would watch her from the corner of the kitchen, her posture curved and her newly grayed hair hanging over the food. I walked over and tugged at her sleeve, but she didn't respond. She was slathering butter on the top crust. "Mom," I said, "did you hear me?" "He needs his strength," she said. "We can't be bothering him." Before I could say anything, Dad walked in. His eyes were red and swollen, but he was smiling. He had 3 cans of Coke in his hands. "I'm starving," he said. "I still have the taste of that horrible cafeteria food in my mouth." "You would think hospitals had good food for how much money they make," Mom said. "I know, right?" Dad said. He placed the Cokes on the counter. Mom didn't want us to go near Jacob's room, but I was getting worried. I peered out from the kitchen. His room hung at the end of the hallway like an abandoned lighthouse, the only sign of life being the NY Yankees poster taped to his door. Near the ground, there was a small sliver of space to see if he had turned on his lights. It was still dark, as it had been for the last 3 days. I turned back to Mom. "Shouldn't we check on him?" I asked. "I don't know why places like Wendy's or Burger King don't put up little shops in hospital," Dad went on. "I mean, you have hundreds of people who are stuck there for days on end. That's consistent business." "It's all politics," Mom said. "They sign these big contracts that are impossible to break." Right, that makes sense, right." Dad was standing next to Mom now, his face inches from the casserole. He took a long sniff. He said. "Smells great. Do you want some of the leftovers while this finishes in the oven?" she asked. "I think we still have some from yesterday. Wasn't the spinach and ricotta one good?" "Very good. Very, very good," he said. I couldn't stop eating it. "Jacob's gonna devour these when he gets the appetite," Mom said. I turned back and took a step into the hallway. The distance between me and his room felt long and narrow, like a high wire. When I got away from the casserole smell, I hit a different smell. It reminded me of old gym socks. Even with Mom's array of candles and incense, I still smelled it. It cut through everything. The last time I saw Jacob was on the drive home from his treatment. His face was a pale green and his eyes kept rolling back. Mom said I had to keep talking to him, to keep his focus. I told him about my friends from school and how they keep pranking the teacher by putting tacks on her chair. It wasn't true. I saw it on a TV show once, but I was running out of material. It didn't matter though. Jacob didn't even respond. All he did was cough. Pink drool was spilling onto his t-shirt. "Danny," Mom said, "why don't you heat up some of those leftovers? We're all craving that spinach and ricotta casserole." "I can't stop thinking about it," Dad said. "I was dreaming about it last night." I ignored them. I kept my focus on my brother's door. I didn't dream about the casserole like Dad. I kept having a different dream. My brother was running into my room and flicking my ear. It was a game we used to play. We would tiptoe up to the other's door, then wait for our moment. Then, the attacker ran in and got 1 or 2 good flicks before retreating. In my dream, though, Jacob would run in and flick me, but I wouldn't move. I just stood there. He would flick and laugh, then flick some more. Sometimes he would flick so hard my ear flew off. "Earth to Danny," Dad said, snapping his fingers in my face. He was standing in front of me, blocking my view of Jacob's door. "Do you mind heating up 4 portions of the casserole in case Jacob wants some? We're going to eat that before this next casserole because we want to make sure Jacob's able to try it because, in my opinion, it was definitely one of your mom's best." I looked up at him and held my eye contact. I couldn't say what I was thinking, so I wanted Dad to feel it. Maybe if I stared long enough, my feelings would translate. But Dad looked at me for only a moment, then away. In that brief connection, though, I saw something I didn't want to see. It was like staring down the tunnel of the world's deepest well. "Come on now," he said. He grabbed my shoulders and turned me around. His voice got heavier. "You're going to want to heat up each piece individually, because if you do them all at once, then you won't get even heat through the pieces, and you'll probably have a couple that are too hot and others that are too cold, and then Jacob won't get the full picture of how good these casseroles are. Dad let go of my shoulders and walked ahead of me, but I stayed in the hallway a moment longer. I turned to look at my brother's door one last time. I fantasized about walking up to it and going inside, but I was afraid Mom would yell at me. Besides, I never liked going in there. He had a puke bucket next to his bed which always had pink splatters in it, and there were always clumps of hair on his pillows. Back before the last hospital visit, Mom would make me go in there and talk to him, but I always made up some excuse, like I had a cold and didn't want to get him sick. When I couldn't get out of it, I would stay in there for a few minutes and watch him try to breathe. I would tell him about some TV episode I saw, then run back to my room. I looked up. I thought I was walking back to the kitchen, but I was moving toward the door. I didn't want to, but I kept moving, like my limbs were controlled by a puppeteer. I put my hand on the doorknob. I turned. The gym sock smell filled my head like helium. Through the darkness, I could make out a sliver of my brother's face. The soft evening light fell on him. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. His arms were straight as rulers, and his fingers curled like a blooming rose. I walked to the side of his bed. Red spit fell off his lips. He looked like a frowning clown. I flicked his ear. It was hard. I walked out and closed the door behind me. As I walked back, I seemed to forget what the inside of, his room looked like. With the door closed, it could be anything. Jacob could be doing jumping jacks, or reading comic books, or plotting his next ear flick attack. When I walked into the kitchen, I heated up 4 plates of spinach and ricotta casserole. When they were done, I wrapped Jacob's plate in aluminum foil and put it in the oven to keep warm. Then, Mom, Dad, and I sat in the dining room and ate in silence. I didn't realize my girlfriend was telling me the literal truth when she told me her secret. I had been dating Mary for about 2 months when she told me about the marble. We had already exchanged the L word. At least she had. She said she loved me, that she wanted to be with me forever, that she wanted nothing more than to spend every night of her life with me, in my arms. I couldn't say it back to her, because obviously, how could I? She had never actually spent a whole night with me. How could I say I love you to a woman who desperately rushed out of the door after a few hours with me? Oh, we slept together. There was no problem in that department. The most amazing sex of our lives, we murmured to each other, our limbs and hair intertwined. Then, as we would get drowsy and heavy, she'd jerk up, frantic, her jade green eyes wide open in terror, start pulling on her clothes. "Mary, come back," I'd beg. "Sweetheart, where are you going? Stay with me." She'd kiss me. "No, I can't. I have to go home. I can't sleep over. I told you so." "But why? You said you don't have kids or husband?" I couldn't help the note of suspicion in my voice. "I swear I don't." She would kiss me deeply. "I just can't sleep over. It's nothing bad, I swear. I have to go." And she'd leave. I believed her. And eventually, after she told me she loved me, she swore me to secrecy and told me the real reason why she wouldn't stay. Sitting close to me, snuggling up, she said, "Fareed, please believe me. I turn into marble when I fall asleep." I smiled kindly. "Okay, Mary, whatever." "No, I'm serious. I turn to actual stone when I sleep. It started happening after an old boyfriend of mine." She paused for a moment and swallowed hard. "Tried to assault me while I was asleep. I fought down the shocking rage which flamed inside me. I drew her closer to me, kissed her, and asked, 'What do you mean, my love?' Tears spilled out of her eyes. I don't know why. I've researched. I've never dared tell anyone. At first it was cool. Then, that's how I knew. I started dating again, and it happened the first night I slept over with the new boyfriend. Barry. I was wakened by his screaming. He was screaming, staring at me. I had turned into a marble statue when asleep, and as I wake up, I turn back to normal human flesh. I shook my head. I didn't understand what she was talking about, but I realized it was some sort of trial of our love. I didn't need to understand. I kissed her trembling lips. Listen, Mary, I don't care about that, okay? You could turn into a frog when you fall asleep and I would still love you. Her eyes lit up. Oh, Fareed, she sighed. You've never told me you love me before. I kissed her again. I haven't? How remiss of me. I'm telling you now. I love you, Mary. She started crying. I thought it was from joy, but thinking back to that night, I realized it was from relief. You don't understand, she sobbed. How terrified I was of losing you. I love you so much. And the sleeping thing, I've never slept over with a man since Barry. He killed himself. He couldn't handle seeing me turn into marble. It wasn't my fault. He already had issues. I stroked her jet black hair. Shh. You don't have to talk about it. But she continued sobbing and talking. No, I ruined all my relationships because I couldn't sleep over with anyone. They all said they didn't mind at first. Then they grew suspicious like you just did. Thought I must be cheating on someone. And then I heard you sounding the same. I couldn't bear it. So I'm telling you, it's just because I turn into marble when I fall asleep. I've filmed myself. It starts from my legs, and then the marble comes all the way up. And then when I wake up, it's reversed. From the top of my head going down, I turn back into human. I wanted her to stop talking about the marble and Barry and the other men she'd slept with before me. I held her closely, kissed her face, which was wet with tears. Please, Mary. Please, it's okay. I believe you. I didn't mean to sound suspicious. I'm sorry. Stay over with me tonight, please. I don't care about the marble. Her sobs gradually faded, and she clung to me. Soon enough, our embrace changed from solace and comfort to passion. Our time together was the most joyful we had ever had. The burden of confession off Mary's shoulders, she abandoned herself to pleasure like I have never seen in a woman, and probably never will again. It was around midnight, I think, that we fell asleep, entangled in each other. I jerked awake only a short while after, conscious of a heavy coldness pressing against my skin, my neck. Something stone cold was against me, digging into my flesh. My right arm and leg seemed to be caged in something cold. I reached out with my free arm and switched on the bedside light, confused and groggy. And then, in the harsh electric light, I saw a statue of a woman lying next to me, in white marble veined with jade green and jet black, her stone arms and legs interlaced with mine. I gave a cry of terror, frantically trying to free my captive arm and leg. At the sound, the marble seemed to shiver, and flush of human color started from the top of her head. I was trying to prise myself free, and just as I succeeded in pulling away and pushing her off, her eyes opened. I pushed her off the bed as I jumped backwards. She fell to the ground, and I heard her cry out, and a loud shattering sound, then silence. "Mary," I quavered, and slowly I went around to her side. There she was, lying in two marble pieces broken on the ground. Only her head was of human flesh, her black hair spread back, her jade green eyes wide open staring at me in agony, her lips open in her last cry. Found out my boyfriend was drugging me every night. Last month I noticed that something is off with my boyfriend. He was being too nice recently, like cleaning up his dirty dishes and being attentive to my needs. I would have thought this was a good thing if only I haven't caught him waking up in the middle of the night and leaving the house. I tried waiting for him to come back, but I fell asleep after some time, and the next thing I knew, he was back in bed with me. That morning, it clicked on me like I found all the pieces to the puzzle. That's why he was acting so nice. And recently, I would admit that we haven't had some sex, and I thought he just wasn't in the mood. Now, I know why. He was having an affair. I was furious and heartbroken. I told my best friend Natalie all about it, and she was as heartbroken as me. She kept asking if I was sure about it. I mean, what other explanation it could be? He'll be gone the whole night, and he'll be back in the morning? What did he do? Buy some milk? I said to her that I have a plan. I'm gonna wake up before he does and catch him red-handed. My best friend just nodded and said that was a good idea. That night, my boyfriend prepared a nice meal for me, something he hadn't before, and I was mildly surprised. I pretended not to know anything about his infidelity, so our conversation went normally. However, when we finally settled back in bed, I had fallen asleep almost instantaneously. My sleep was so good that I wasn't able to wake up at midnight. I was disappointed with myself. How could I have slept on it? What's weird was in the following nights that kept happening to me. I couldn't wake up in the middle of the night. I also tried staying up all night, but at some point, I would fall asleep. That is very unusual since I have been a night shift employee before, and I didn't have this kind of trouble of suddenly falling asleep. Sometimes, I couldn't even remember what happened last night. My crazy brain thought maybe my boyfriend was drugging me, putting something to make me sleep through the night. That's the only possible explanation I could think of. But then, I asked myself, how did he know about my plan? My heart sank as I realized the answer to my question. Natalie, my best friend. I couldn't believe it. Why would she betray me? Is she my BF's lover? At this point, I was intoxicated with anger. I skipped dinner and only drank water from tap. I made sure none of my BF's drugs would reach me. My boyfriend was even persistent that I should eat or at least drink some milk. To me, that was a confirmation that he was indeed drugging me. I was about to confront him about his infidelity right then and there, but I felt a blunt force hit me at the back of my head and I was out. When I came to, I was tied up in bed and my boyfriend was watching me at the corner of our bedroom. He was biting his lips and was pale as a sheet. "What is this?" I asked him. His eyes lit up when he saw me awake. He then ran to our living room and called for someone. My heart sank as I saw who it was. It was Natalie. I yelled immediately after seeing her. "It was you! How fucking dare you!" I shouted at her. Natalie asked me to calm down. "It's not what you think," she kept repeating. "I'm gonna kill you both when I get out of here." I kept trying to free myself, but to no avail. They used some of the thickest rope I've seen. "Babe, listen to me," my boyfriend said. "I'm not cheating on you, and certainly Natalie and I have no romantic relationship. I get out of bed every night because I need to stay safe." "Stay safe?" I asked. "Stay safe from what?" "From you," he answered quickly. "What?" "Jace, it's near 3. We should get out of here," Natalie whispered. My boyfriend then took out a paint bucket and painted my hands and legs with red paint. I squirmed and yelled as he did it in a hurry. All the while, I was thinking, who is this person? Is this really my boyfriend? How could he do all of this to me? As if he could hear my thoughts, he kissed my forehead and said, "You'll understand everything tomorrow, I promise." Before I could reply, he and Natalie ran away and I was all alone in our bedroom. I kept screaming for help, but I knew it was pointless. My mind was racing as fast as my heartbeat. My lungs felt like it was shrinking as I breathed for air. Number. How could they do this to me? Why are they doing this? I kept trying to free myself, but I got exhausted at some point and lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was still in bed. But I noticed that the ropes that bound me last night were now roughly severed, and my wrist burned like hell. As I looked around the room, I understood Jace. The floor, the walls, and the ceiling as well were full of red handprints. Story 1. Run. And if you can't run, then walk. And if you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, don't stop. It's only been an hour since everyone on Earth, as far as I could tell, heard those same words. I was already walking through the park when I heard them, and after seeing what happens, I won't be stopping anytime soon. It's been 2 hours now. I've kept walking. I'm tired, but stopping is not an option. Some people tried driving, but the act of getting in a car requires stopping, even for the briefest moment. And as those already driving when they heard the rules soon found out, it's impossible to move indefinitely in a vehicle, especially in a crowded city. Their screams kept me moving. It's been 4 hours now, and I'm exhausted, with the only thing pushing me forward being the fear of what awaits when I stop. And yes, I mean when, proven by plenty of those around me, eventually I'll have to stop. Some have just given up, accepting contact with me. He had stopped moving. His eyes were bloodshot, and not just whites around his pupils. I mean the entirety of his eyes were crimson red. Black tears streamed down his expressionless face, and then he smiled. A wide, toothy smile that would have screamed of joy if it wasn't followed by animalistic screams that would give the biggest horror fanatic nightmares. I wish I could say witnessing his dying moments was the most horrific thing to happen to me today. But then it hit me, the realization that I had stopped moving. Story 3. My girlfriend talks in her sleep. At first it was cute and hilarious to tell her what she said. It was harmless nonsense. The sky is folding, or we need to raise the ground. We'd talk the next day about if she remembered her dream, but she never did. I wish I knew what she meant by, we need to raise the ground. Some context, our nightly routine is for us to start out cuddling and then give up once it gets too hot. Then we're usually both on our sides, back to back. She would fall asleep before I do, and so I would hear the full range of her nightly musings. Honestly, at first I was eager to hear what she said. It was always funny to tell her and our friends what she would say while deep in the throes of REM. But now I'm done. I'd prefer she not talk anymore. How am I going to sleep after what happened last night? Last night, around 11 p.m., she was asleep, and I was still up reading. Back to back, I hear her mumble something under her breath. I couldn't quite make out what she said, but I lean over from my book to peek at her face, and she is sleeping soundly. I return to my book, get absorbed back into its pages. At some point I fall asleep. Next thing I know, I'm woken up by my girlfriend talking at full volume. I open my eyes, and at some point in the night both of us have turned to lay face to face. My girlfriend's eyes are wide open. She is staring right at me, mere inches from my face. But her eyes are vacuous, like she is looking through me. These eyes, man. It's like she was straining to widen them as much as possible. Those are the eyes I fell in love with, and right now, they are scaring the absolute piss out of me. My heart rate skyrockets, and chock full of adrenaline, I throw off the covers and jump out of bed. Looking at her, her eyes follow me like a painting, but her body stays still. For 1 second, I decided that my book light was keeping her awake, and what she had said was, "Can you please turn that off?" Now out of bed and looking at her, she's not right. Her body hasn't moved, but her eyes dart from looking at me to looking around the room. I dare to ask her, "Are you all right?" No response. Those eyes look at me when I speak, though. They are now deadlocked, looking right into my eyes. Her breathing hasn't changed. That is a sleep breathing for sure. That's when, while looking right at me, she says in a too deep voice, "Come back to bed, dearie." My girlfriend has never called me dearie before. We have pet names, sure, but they range from pumpkin, baby, to cupcake. Dearie sounds like something my grandmother would call me. I decide I'll get more information before I climb back into bed with a potentially possessed girlfriend. "Are you awake, sweetie?" No response. The eyes dart from me to the wall, to the door, and then the ceiling. I'm about to nope out of the room when her wide open eyes rolled to the back of her head. The white from those eyes stands out in the dim radiance of the booklight. "No pupils in sight," she insists. Of course I'm awake, come back to bed, with a subtle tap of the fingers on the comforter. Looking at her fingers now, I'm starting to come around. She's never sleepwalked before. Surely she is awake now if she is moving her hands. But looking at her fingers, it is as though she is pretending to have control. They are all going in different directions, one finger pointing straight down and the others to the side. Those hands are not my girlfriend's hands. They are simulating normal movement as best they can, though. I say, "I'm going to get a drink of water, baby. Be right back. Can I get you anything?" fully planning to run out of the house the moment I'm over the threshold. But my normally agreeable and sweet girlfriend decides I'm not allowed to leave. As serious as cancer, she says in that too-deep horror voice. Take one step out of that door and I will rip out your throat and shit down your neck. Shocked but understanding the importance of not letting this beast know I am in trouble, I reply, as interesting as a proposition as that is, I think I'm going to... And thinking quickly, I grab my water bottle from the nightstand. This doesn't please my girlfriend as she decides to start screaming and fingering her way towards me. It is a supernatural scream, so high-pitched and bird-like I feel as though my neighbors 3 houses down were going to ask us if they heard that last night. As fast as I can muster, I unscrew the lid and douse her in water, like I knew what I was doing. Her eyes close, her garbled appendages normalize, and she is back asleep. I'm going to sleep on the couch for a while, maybe forever. She'll understand when she's awake. Don't Google yourself. Why? Because you may not like what you find. One day, I was bored and decided to search for my own name on Google. I have quite a rare name, so I didn't expect to find many results. Imagine how surprised I was when I came across a website that had my full name in the domain, www.myname.com. When I clicked the link, it brought me to a message board. I looked at the profile of the website owner and found out that the person was the same age as me and had the same hobbies and interests. There weren't any posts on the message board, but I was intrigued, so I saved it in my favorites. It was about a month later when I went back to the website. This time, it had more content. There were some diary entries, mostly random things like, the weather was nice today, or I'm so bored in work, things of that nature. However, as time went on, I began to notice more and more coincidences. The person lived in the same city as I did. It struck me as rather strange that 2 people with the exact same rare name would be living in the same city at the same time. At one point, I noticed that the contents of the diary were quite similar to my own life. One day, I went to a baseball game, and when I checked the website that evening, I found that the owner of the site had gone to the same ball game. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, tens of thousands of people in the city supported the same baseball team. It began to seem like much more than a simple coincidence. Whenever I checked the website, I would notice little biographical details that seemed too close for comfort. For example, the owner mentioned their pet dog, and the dog's name was the same as the dog I had when I was a child. The website owner posted a picture of their car. It was the same model of car I had been driving when I was in college. They talked about eating at a certain restaurant. It was the same restaurant I had gone to all the time when I was working at my previous job. One day, when I looked at the message board, people had written messages to the owner saying, "Happy birthday." That day, it was my birthday as well. I decided to write on the message board for the first time, just out of curiosity. I was going to wish the owner a happy birthday and tell them we had the same name. However, when I tried to write something, I realized that there was nowhere to type your message. It wasn't a message board at all. Just a static page. That's odd, I thought to myself. In other words, whoever owned the website had gone to a lot of trouble to make it seem as if it was an interactive site, as if there were other people posting on it, when in actual fact, all the content must have been created by the owner. Why on earth would someone do that, I wondered. I decided to send an email to the owner. It read, "Hi there. Believe it or not, we both share the same name. Nice to meet you." It was just a friendly email. The next day, when I tried to look at the website, I discovered that it was gone. It seemed like it had been deleted. Then I opened my mailbox. There was one reply. When I looked at it, a chill ran down my spine. It just read, "Found you." I recently moved to the remote outback of northern Colorado with my mom and our dog, Travis. I never wanted to move. But after the divorce and the trouble Mom was having with her job, we had no choice. Life had unraveled too fast, and this desolate, forgotten place was all we could afford. The town was unsettling, shrouded in a nightly fog that clung to the ground like a restless ghost. It wasn't just quiet, it was unnaturally silent, the kind of stillness that prickles your skin and sets your nerves on edge. The cheap housing prices seemed like a blessing at first. but soon I learned why they were so low. There was an asylum nearby. No one talked about it much, as if naming it would conjure something dreadful. The locals called it the Hollow, a fitting name for a place said to house some of the most deranged and violent minds in the country. We never saw it. Its location was deliberately obscured, tucked away in the wilderness, as though hiding it could contain the madness. At first, the thought of the asylum didn't bother me. It was just a creepy story to whisper in the dark, until last night. Mom had taken another late shift at the diner, leaving me alone in the house again. By now, I was used to it, but living this close to the Hollow came with rules. Every door and window had to be bolted with bars and deadlocks before nightfall. The routine was second nature by now. I went through the motions, securing the house, brushing my teeth, and finally climbing into bed. Travis had a comforting ritual of his own, licking my hand as I reached down to wish him good night. His warm, wet tongue always made me feel less alone in the suffocating quiet. I had trouble sleeping without background noise, so I switched on the radio. But instead of the soothing hum of static, a frantic broadcast poured through the speakers, every word twisting my stomach into tighter knots. "There's been a breakout at the Hollow," the announcer said, his voice trembling just enough to betray his fear. "Citizens are advised to remain calm and stay indoors. Do not engage with any escapees." My throat closed up. Escapees? Here? My first thought was Mum. I grabbed my phone and called her, my heart pounding so loudly I barely heard the ring. Relief washed over me when she answered, her voice steady, almost dismissive of my panic. "I'm fine," she assured me. "Nothing's going to happen. Just lock up and go to bed, all right?" I hung up, trying to convince myself she was right. The house was secure. No one could get in. I climbed back under the covers and stretched my hand down for Travis. His tongue brushed my palm. Lick, lick, lick. The silence pressed against my ears like a heavy weight. It was almost suffocating, until a new sound sliced through it. Drip, drip, drip. I sat up, every muscle tensing. The noise seemed to come from the kitchen. A leaky tap, I told myself, nothing more. I patted down the hall and twisted the faucet tight, the sound stopping instantly. Satisfied, I returned to bed. "Good night, Travis," I murmured, dropping my hand once more. Lick, lick, lick. But then, the dripping came again. Louder this time, closer. Drip, drip, drip. The sound wasn't coming from the kitchen anymore. It was coming from inside my room. My stomach churned as I turned on the light and scanned the space. It seemed to be coming from the closet. My pulse hammered in my ears as I crept toward the closet door, gripping a kitchen knife in one hand and a pillow in the other, as if that could protect me. With a shaking hand, I pulled the door open. The sight inside made my blood freeze. There, hanging from the closet rod, was Travis. His lifeless body swayed slightly, his fur matted with thick, dark blood that dripped onto the floor below. Drip, drip, drip. My mind reeled as the realization hit me like a sledgehammer. If Travis was here, then who, no, what was under my bed? The whispering shadows. Mia had always loved the solitude of her late-night jogs through the quiet suburban streets. She felt a sense of peace under the dim glow of the streetlights, with only the rhythmic sound of her footsteps for company. But tonight, something felt different. As she rounded the corner onto Maple Lane, she noticed a figure standing beneath a flickering street lamp. The figure was motionless, its face obscured by the shadows. Mia slowed her pace, unease settling in her chest. The figure turned its head ever so slightly, and although its features were still hidden, she felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Trying to shake off the paranoia, Mia crossed to the other side of the street and picked up her pace. She glanced back, but the figure was gone. A chill crept down her spine. She reminded herself that it was probably just her imagination, or another late-night jogger. Continuing her route, Mia reached the park where she usually paused to catch her breath. As she leaned against a bench, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a notification. Unknown device detected nearby. Confused, she looked around. The park was deserted, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Then she heard it, a faint whisper, so soft it was almost inaudible. Mia. She froze. Her name had been spoken, but no one was there. Panicking, she turned and started running back home, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispering grew louder, following her. Mia, wait! Don't run! She didn't stop until she reached her house, slamming the door shut behind her. Locking every bolt, she tried to calm herself, her breathing ragged. But then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Her phone, which she'd left on the counter, lit up. The screen displayed a message. You can't hide from me. And then, in the reflection of the screen, she saw it. The shadowy figure standing right behind her. The forgotten basement. When Jack and Emily purchased the old Victorian house, they were thrilled to start a new chapter of their lives. The house was charming, with its creaky wooden floors and stained glass windows. But there was one part of the house they avoided, the basement. The real estate agent had mentioned the basement was unusual and that it hadn't been used in decades. Jack dismissed it as a typical quirk of an old house. Emily, however, felt an unsettling energy every time she passed the locked basement door. One stormy night, the power went out. Armed with a flashlight, Jack decided to check the basement for the circuit breaker. Emily reluctantly followed, her gut twisting with dread. The air grew colder as they descended the stairs. The flashlight beam revealed cobwebs, rusted tools, and dusty furniture. But in the corner, something caught their eye. A small wooden chest. It was locked with a heavy padlock, but curiosity got the better of Jack. Using a crowbar, he pried it open. Inside was a collection of old photographs, all depicting the same man standing in various rooms of the house. His face was eerily blank, as though his features had been smudged out. Then they noticed the photographs began to include other people, women and children, standing beside the man, their expressions frozen in terror. One of the last photos showed a family that looked eerily like Jack and Emily. A loud bang interrupted their shock. The basement door slammed shut, plunging them into darkness. Emily screamed as something icy brushed against her arm. The flashlight flickered back on, revealing the man from the photographs standing at the foot of the stairs. His face was no longer blank. It was a grotesque, twisted grin. You shouldn't have opened the chest, he rasped. The last thing they saw was his shadow engulfing them, and then silence filled the basement once more.